snow lashed the empty train platform as the Millionaire Cowboy stepped off his private carriage and froze. A young nurse, shivering violently, sat alone on a wooden bench, her hands blue from cold, clutching a worn medical bag. One glance into her exhausted eyes changed the course of both their lives forever. Daniel Carter was known across 3 states as the quiet millionaire cowboy who owned miles of ranch land and never wasted words or emotions. People said wealth had hardened him, that success had built a wall around his heart. Yet that winter night at the rural train station, something inside him cracked open. The platform was nearly deserted, only the distant whistle of a departing train echoing through the cold air. Then he noticed her. She sat hunched over, wrapped in a thin coat that did nothing against the freezing wind. Her hands trembled uncontrollably, and her lips were pale, yet she tried to stay upright with quiet dignity. A medical badge hung from her neck, swaying slightly in the wind. Daniel's boots slowed instinctively. He had seen suffering before, workers injured on his ranch, droughts, storms, but there was a loneliness in her posture that struck deeper than pain. "Miss, are you all right?" he asked softly. She lifted her eyes, filled with exhaustion and quiet strength. I missed the last train," she whispered, trying to smile through chattering teeth. In that fragile moment, Daniel felt something unfamiliar stir within him, an urgent, protective compassion that wealth had never bought him. Her name was Clara Hayes, a traveling nurse returning from a remote clinic where she had spent weeks treating patients who could not afford proper care. The last train had left early due to the storm, leaving her stranded with barely enough money for food, let alone shelter. She hadn't asked anyone for help. Pride and resilience were stitched into her spirit like quiet armor. Daniel listened as she spoke, her voice calm despite the cold gnawing at her bones. The wind howled between them, yet her words felt steady, grounded in purpose. He noticed how tightly she clutched her medical bag, as if it carried more than instruments, perhaps the weight of countless lives she had tried to save. "You can't stay here tonight," Daniel said firmly. "You'll freeze." She hesitated. Accepting help from strangers was not in her nature. "I'll manage," she replied gently, though her trembling betrayed her strength. Daniel removed his heavy coat and draped it over her shoulders without waiting for permission. The warmth made her eyes widen in surprise, and for a brief second, vulnerability replaced her composure. No one had looked at her with such concern before, not as a nurse, but as a human being who also needed care. That silent gesture built the first fragile bridge between 2 very different worlds. Daniel insisted she come to the small station cafe that remained open for stranded travelers. Inside, the faint smell of coffee and firewood softened the harshness of the night. Clara wrapped her hands around the warm mug he bought her, her fingers slowly regaining life. She didn't speak much, but her eyes revealed stories of sleepless nights, endless patience, and quiet sacrifices made without recognition. He found himself watching her carefully, not out of curiosity, but admiration. She spoke about her work with humility, never glorifying her sacrifices. "People just need someone to stay beside them when they're scared," she said softly. "Medicine helps, but presence heals differently." Those words struck Daniel deeper than any business deal or ranch negotiation ever had. He realized how many people he had helped financially, yet never truly stood beside them emotionally. Wealth had allowed him to solve problems, but not to understand pain. Clara, meanwhile, observed the gentleness behind his rugged appearance. This wealthy cowboy didn't carry arrogance. Instead, there was a quiet loneliness in the way he stared into the fire, as if success had cost him something unnamed. For the first time in years, Daniel felt seen, not as a millionaire, but as a man searching for meaning beyond land and money. The storm worsened, forcing the station to announce that no trains would run until morning. Clara's shoulders tensed at the news, calculating silently how she would manage another night away from work and responsibility. Daniel noticed the worry flicker across her face and felt an unexpected urge to ease that burden. "You can stay at the ranch tonight," he offered cautiously. "There's plenty of room, and you'll be safe." She hesitated again, torn between caution and exhaustion. Trust was not easily given, especially by someone who had spent years relying only on herself. Yet there was sincerity in his voice that felt disarming. He didn't sound like a man making a grand gesture. He sounded like someone simply unwilling to leave another human being alone in the cold. After a long pause, she nodded. "Only until morning," she clarified softly. The ride to the ranch was quiet, filled with unspoken thoughts. Clara watched snow blur past the window, wondering how fate had led her to this stranger. Daniel, gripping the wheel, felt a strange sense of purpose, as if rescuing her from the cold meant rescuing something lost inside himself. Neither realized that this night was not an accident, but the beginning of a story that history would one day remember. At the ranch house, warmth embraced them immediately, firelight flickering across wooden walls filled with memories Daniel rarely revisited. He showed Clara to a guest room, simple yet comfortable, and left quietly, respecting her space. But sleep did not come easily to either of them that night. Clara lay awake, reflecting on the strange kindness she had received. She had spent years healing others, while ignoring her own loneliness. Tonight, for the first time, someone had cared for her without expecting anything in return. The realization stirred emotions she had buried beneath responsibility and duty. In another room, Daniel stared at the ceiling, replaying every word she had spoken. Her dedication, her humility, her quiet strength. It all made his success feel suddenly hollow. He had built an empire of land and wealth, yet never built something as meaningful as a life dedicated to serving others. He wondered what it would feel like to live with purpose instead of profit. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the ranch, two hearts slowly shifted. One rediscovered the courage to be cared for. The other discovered that true richness might not be measured in acres or dollars, but in compassion shared on a freezing, unexpected night. Morning arrived with a quiet stillness, the storm having softened into gentle snowfall that blanketed the ranch in white silence. Clara woke early, instinctively prepared to resume her routine of duty and care. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then the warmth of the room and the neatly folded blanket reminded her of the cowboy who had offered shelter without hesitation. She sat up slowly, her body still tired, but her heart strangely lighter. In the kitchen, she found Daniel preparing coffee with awkward concentration, as if hosting someone unsettled him more than any business meeting ever had. He looked up, surprised but pleased to see her awake. "I wasn't sure what nurses drink," he admitted quietly, gesturing to the cups lined on the counter. She smiled faintly. "Anything warm is perfect." They shared breakfast in gentle conversation. Clara spoke about the rural clinics she visited, about patients who paid with gratitude instead of money. Daniel listened carefully, realizing how little he knew about the struggles beyond his prosperous ranch. Her stories painted a world where compassion replaced currency. Something shifted inside him. For the first time, Daniel questioned whether his wealth could do more than grow his land. Perhaps it could grow hope too, if only he had the courage to let someone like Clara guide him toward a different kind of legacy. After breakfast, Clara insisted on leaving, reminding herself that kindness should never become dependency. Duty called her back to the small towns, where patients waited with fragile hope. Daniel offered to drive her to the station once trains resumed, but she shook her head gently. "You've already done more than enough," she said, her voice sincere yet guarded. He walked her to the porch, where the snow glowed under the pale winter sun. For a moment neither spoke. Words suddenly felt inadequate against the quiet bond forming between them. Daniel noticed the way she looked across the ranch, not with envy, but with curiosity, as if imagining how many lives could be touched by such abundance. "Do you ever get tired?" he asked suddenly, "of always being the one who stays strong for everyone else?" The question caught her off guard. No one had asked her that before. She hesitated, then admitted softly, "Sometimes, but someone has to stay when others walk away." Her honesty lingered in the air like a fragile confession. Daniel realized then that her strength was not invincible. It was chosen daily, despite exhaustion. As she stepped toward the waiting car, he felt a quiet certainty grow. Meeting her was not random. It was a reminder that even the strongest hearts sometimes needed someone to stand beside them. Weeks passed, yet Clara's presence remained in Daniel's thoughts like a soft echo he couldn't silence. He found himself revisiting her words while overseeing ranch work, noticing details he had once ignored. The struggles of workers' families, the silent hardships hidden behind polite smiles. Wealth suddenly felt incomplete if it only protected his world while leaving others vulnerable. One afternoon, he made a decision that surprised even himself. He visited the rural clinic Clara had mentioned, stepping into a modest building filled with worn chairs, faded walls, and patients waiting patiently. There she was, moving from one person to another with tireless dedication, offering comfort as much as medicine. When she saw him, surprise flickered across her face. "Mr. Carter, what brings you here?" He hesitated, feeling oddly nervous. "I wanted to understand the world you fight for every day." Clara studied him, searching for insincerity but finding none. She showed him around, introducing him to patients who spoke of her kindness with reverence. Daniel watched quietly, realizing that her true wealth was measured in lives touched, not money earned. That day, admiration deepened into something more personal, a respect rooted in shared humanity rather than social status. As winter gave way to early spring, Daniel began supporting the clinic quietly, funding supplies and improvements without attaching his name. Clara discovered his contributions by accident and confronted him gently. "You don't have to do this," she said, eyes filled with both gratitude and concern. "People might think you expect something in return." He shook his head firmly. "I'm doing it because you made me see what I was blind to." Her chest tightened at his words. For years, she had believed kindness existed mostly in small gestures, not in grand acts from powerful people. Daniel's sincerity challenged that belief. Yet she also feared becoming dependent on his generosity, worried that their growing closeness might blur boundaries she had carefully maintained. They walked outside the clinic, where blooming flowers replaced winter's harshness. The air carried a sense of renewal, mirroring the emotional shift between them. "I've always lived for others," she confessed quietly. "I never thought someone would choose to stand beside me." Daniel looked at her, his voice steady, yet vulnerable. "Maybe history isn't made by grand victories, but by choosing compassion when it's easier to stay distant." In that moment, both sensed their lives intertwining in ways neither had planned. Their connection grew through shared visits to clinics, quiet conversations over coffee, and long walks where they spoke about dreams they had once buried. Clara shared regrets about never pursuing a personal life, believing her duty left no room for love. Daniel admitted that his wealth had isolated him, leaving him surrounded by success, yet starved of genuine companionship. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the ranch hills, they sat on the fence watching workers return home to their families. The sight stirred a deep longing in both their hearts. "Do you ever wonder what life would look like if we allowed ourselves to choose happiness?" Daniel asked softly. Clara remained silent, her eyes reflecting both hope and fear. Love felt like a risk she could not afford. Her life had always been unpredictable, shaped by emergencies and sacrifices. Yet Daniel's presence made that risk feel strangely safe. She finally whispered, "Happiness feels fragile, like something that could disappear if we hold it too tightly." Daniel understood. He didn't promise forever or demand certainty. Instead, he offered something simpler, yet more powerful. "Then we'll hold it gently," he said, "day by day." And with that quiet promise, the foundation of a love story that would one day make history was laid. spring unfolded gently across the countryside, bringing new life to fields that had once seemed lifeless under winter's grip. With each passing day, Daniel and Clara found themselves spending more time together, not of obligation, but because their presence felt natural, almost necessary. They visited clinics, organized supply drives, and quietly transformed small towns that had long been forgotten by prosperity. Yet beneath this growing closeness, Clara carried an unspoken fear. She had built her life around service, around being the one others depended on. Love, she worried, might weaken her resolve or distract her from the people who needed her most. Late one evening, as they reviewed patient lists in the clinic office, she finally voiced her concern. "What if I fail them?" she whispered. "What if loving someone means I can't give everything to those who rely on me?" Daniel looked at her with deep understanding. "Loving someone doesn't take strength away," he said quietly. "Sometimes it gives you more of it." His words lingered in her heart long after they left the clinic. For the first time, she wondered if love and purpose could coexist, if perhaps, instead of weakening her mission, love might make her compassion even deeper and her spirit even stronger. Meanwhile, Daniel faced his own internal battle. His business partners questioned his increasing involvement in charitable work, warning him that emotional decisions could threaten his empire. Their words stirred doubt he hadn't felt in years. Was he risking everything he had built for a feeling he barely understood? One afternoon, he rode alone across his ranch, the vast land stretching endlessly before him. It had always symbolized his success, his security. Yet now, it also reminded him of years spent chasing growth while ignoring emptiness. He realized that for all his wealth, he had never once felt the quiet fulfillment he experienced while helping Clara serve others. That realization scared him as much as it comforted him. Love demanded vulnerability, and vulnerability meant risking loss. He had lost people before, family, friendships, dreams, and each loss had taught him to protect his heart behind success. But Clara's presence softened that protective wall. She didn't ask for promises or grand declarations. She only asked him to show up, to care, to stay when others might leave. And deep down, Daniel knew he was ready to take that risk, even if it meant rewriting everything he once believed about strength and security. Their relationship remained unspoken, yet deeply understood, woven through shared actions rather than dramatic confessions. They worked side by side during long clinic days, exchanged knowing glances during quiet moments, and found comfort in each other's silence. It was a love growing not from excitement, but from trust built slowly over time. One evening, Clara received urgent news. A distant town had been struck by a severe illness outbreak, and medical help was desperately needed. Without hesitation, she prepared to leave immediately. Daniel watched her pack supplies, recognizing the familiar determination in her movements. "You're going alone?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. "They need help now," she replied firmly. "I can't wait for more support." He paused, then spoke with quiet resolve. "Then I'm coming with you." She looked up, surprised. "You don't have to risk your responsibilities for this." Daniel shook his head gently. "This is my responsibility to now." In that moment, Clara felt something shift deeply within her. She realized that love wasn't about choosing between personal happiness and purpose. It was about finding someone willing to walk the difficult path beside you, sharing both burdens and hope without hesitation or expectation. The journey to the distant town was long and emotionally exhausting. They worked tirelessly, treating patients, comforting families, and organizing resources. Daniel, who once negotiated land deals, now spent hours carrying medical supplies, assisting nurses, and listening to frightened villagers with unexpected patience. Clara observed him quietly, witnessing a transformation that words could barely capture. This was no longer just a wealthy cowboy offering charity. This was a man who had chosen compassion as his purpose. She realized that his presence wasn't a temporary gesture. It was a commitment rooted in genuine care. One night, after tending to patients for hours, Clara collapsed into a chair, exhaustion finally overtaking her strength. Daniel knelt beside her, offering water and a reassuring smile. "You don't have to carry everything alone," he murmured. Tears welled in her eyes, not from weakness, but from relief. For years, she had been the strong one, the caregiver, the steady support others leaned on. Now, someone stood firmly beside her, not to replace her strength, but to share it. In that fragile moment, she allowed herself to lean on him, realizing that true partnership meant mutual support, not silent sacrifice. After weeks of tireless work, the outbreak was finally contained. The town slowly returned to life, and gratitude filled every street they walked through. People spoke of Clara as an angel of healing and Daniel as the unexpected protector who had stood by her side when hope felt distant. On their final evening there, they stood on a quiet hill overlooking the recovering town. The sunset painted the sky in warm shades of gold and crimson, mirroring the quiet warmth growing between them. Clara broke the silence first. "I always believed love was a distraction from purpose," she admitted softly. "But now I see, can actually give purpose deeper meaning." Daniel's voice was gentle yet steady. "You taught me that wealth means nothing if it doesn't heal something beyond yourself." They didn't exchange dramatic promises or declarations. Instead, they simply stood together, understanding that their lives had already intertwined through shared sacrifices and compassion. Love had grown not from grand gestures, but from countless small moments of standing together when life demanded strength. Neither of them realized yet that their journey was far from over, and that the greatest test of their love still waited just beyond the horizon. Returning home, life seemed calmer, yet a quiet tension lingered beneath the surface. Their bond had deepened through hardship, but now they faced a different challenge. How to integrate this love into their everyday lives without losing the identities they had built over years of independence and sacrifice. Clara resumed her work at the clinic, while Daniel balanced his business responsibilities with ongoing support from medical programs. Outwardly, everything appeared stable, yet internally both wrestled with uncertainty. One afternoon, Clara received an offer from an international humanitarian organization. They wanted her to lead medical missions abroad, helping communities in crisis zones. It was the kind of opportunity she had dreamed about for years, one that could save countless lives. But accepting it would mean leaving the life she had slowly begun to build with Daniel. When she told him, she expected disappointment or persuasion. Instead, he listened silently, his expression calm but thoughtful. "This is who you are," he said gently. "You were meant to heal beyond borders." His support both comforted and hurt her. It reminded her that true love did not cage dreams. It gave them wings. Yet the possibility of leaving him behind filled her heart with a quiet ache she could no longer ignore. That night, Clara walked alone beneath the vast sky, wrestling with emotions she had long avoided. She had always believed sacrifice meant giving up personal happiness for the sake of others. But now she questioned whether denying her own heart was truly noble, or simply another form of fear. She loved her purpose, yet she also loved the man who had stood beside her without demanding anything in return. Meanwhile, Daniel sat on the ranch porch, staring across the fields that once defined his entire identity. For years, he had feared loss more than loneliness, believing attachment would eventually lead to heartbreak. Now he realized that avoiding love had been its own form of emptiness. Loving Clara had not weakened him. It had expanded his world far beyond land and profit. When she returned, they spoke honestly for the first time about their fears, regrets, and hopes. "I don't want to hold you back," he said quietly, "but I also don't want to pretend you mean less to me than you do." Her eyes filled with tears. In that moment, she understood that love was not about choosing between dreams and devotion. It was about finding the courage to honor both, even when the path ahead felt uncertain. Days passed in thoughtful silence as Clara prepared for her decision. She visited patients, each interaction reminding her why she had chosen this life of service. Yet every time she saw Daniel waiting patiently, offering quiet encouragement without pressure, her heart felt torn between two forms of calling, one to the world and one to a shared future built on mutual compassion. Finally, she made a choice, not one of sacrifice, but of balance. She accepted the humanitarian role, but with conditions that allowed her to return regularly and continue the clinic work they had built together. It was not a perfect solution, but it was an honest one, reflecting both her commitment to healing and her commitment to love. When she told Daniel, he didn't react with dramatic emotion. Instead, he smiled softly, pride shining in his eyes. "You were never meant to stay small for anyone," he said, "and loving you means supporting the path that makes you fully yourself." Those words carried more depth than any promise. They affirmed that their love was not possessive. It was liberating. It allowed both of them to grow without fear of losing one another, trusting that true connection would endure across distance and time. Years later, their story became known far beyond their small towns. Clara's humanitarian missions saved countless lives across different countries, while Daniel transformed his wealth into a network of clinics and support programs inspired by her compassion. Together, though often apart physically, they built a legacy rooted not in romance alone, but in shared service to humanity. Whenever Clara returned home, they walked quietly through the ranch fields, reflecting on how a freezing night at a train station had changed everything. They spoke about regrets they once carried, his fear of vulnerability, her fear of losing purpose, and how love had slowly healed those wounds rather than deepening them. Communities began to speak of them as symbols of something rare, a love story that did not distract from purpose, but strengthened it. They showed that kindness and ambition could coexist, that sacrifice did not always mean separation, and that second chances could arrive when least expected. Their love was not loud or dramatic. It was steady, resilient, and quietly transformative, like a warm light guiding others through their own seasons of doubt and struggle. On the anniversary of the night they first met, they returned to the same train station. The wooden bench had been restored, now bearing a small plaque honoring the countless medical missions and community programs their partnership had inspired. Snow fell gently again, mirroring the night that had once felt so cold and uncertain. Clara sat on the bench, smiling softly as memories flooded back. "I was so afraid that night," she admitted. "Afraid of the cold, of the future, and of letting someone truly see me." Daniel sat beside her, his voice warm with quiet emotion. "And I was afraid of feeling something I couldn't control," he confessed. "But that fear led me to the greatest purpose of my life." They held hands, not as two people who had completed each other, but as two individuals who had chosen to walk beside one another through growth, distance, sacrifice, and hope. Their journey proved that love was not defined by proximity or perfection, but by unwavering presence across changing seasons. As the train whistle echoed in the distance, they understood that history would remember their achievements, but their hearts would always remember the simple act of kindness that started it all. Love doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it begins with a simple act of kindness on a freezing night. When compassion meets courage, lives change, and history is quietly written. If this story touched your heart, subscribe, like, and join our Heart Angels family.